I waited 15 years to get my revenge, and it was everything I imagined it to be. When people hear about revenge, they picture something violent and immediate, a confrontation, a moment of brutal justice. But true revenge isn't impulsive, it's patient. It waits in the shadows, growing stronger while your enemy grows comfortable. I wasn't always like this. Calculating, patient, cold. Once I was Catherine Porter's bright-eyed niece with dreams of changing the world through innovation. My Aunt Catherine was brilliant, an engineer who built Porter Industries from a garage startup into a technological powerhouse. She took me under her wing when my parents died, showed me how circuits worked before I could tie my shoes. Diana, she'd tell me, in business and in life, integrity is everything. Without it, none of this matters. I believed her. I was 16, idealistic, and she was my hero. Then she died. Car accident, they said. I remember Malcolm, her brother, putting his arm around me at the funeral. She would have wanted you to be strong, he whispered. I nodded through my tears, grateful for his support. 2 months later, Malcolm took over the company. Catherine's patents were suddenly in his name. Her innovations became Porter's Breakthrough Technologies. Her picture disappeared from the company lobby. History rewritten. I was young but not stupid. Something felt wrong, but I had no proof, no power, and nowhere to go. Malcolm became my legal guardian. He enrolled me in boarding school, the best education money can buy. And I saw him maybe twice a year after that. When I graduated college with a double major in business and computer science, Malcolm offered me an entry-level position at Porter Industries. It's what Catherine would have wanted, he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Family taking care of family. I accepted, not because I believed him, but because I needed to know what had really happened to my aunt. My revenge began the day Malcolm introduced me as my assistant to the board of directors. I'd written the entire business proposal that saved his failing company, stayed up for 3 straight nights crunching numbers while he entertained clients on his yacht. When the board applauded, Malcolm stepped forward and took a bow. I didn't say a word. I simply smiled and refilled everyone's water glasses. That's why I hired her, Malcolm told them later. Brilliant with details, but knows her place. That night, I typed my resignation letter but never sent it. Instead, I created a new folder on my laptop labeled Patience. For 15 years, I became indispensable to Malcolm. I managed his calendar, knew his passwords, handled his personal affairs. When his wife left him, I arranged the divorce settlement. When his son needed rehab, I found the facility and negotiated the price. When he needed to hide money from the IRS, I created the offshore accounts. Each passing year, I gathered more evidence, more secrets, more leverage. The first 2 years were the hardest. Malcolm was cautious around me, keeping me at arm's length. I worked 16-hour days proving my loyalty, swallowing my rage when he took credit for my work. At night, I'd return to my tiny apartment and meticulously document everything I'd observed. By year 3, Malcolm had grown comfortable enough to leave me alone with sensitive files. That's when I found the first piece of real evidence, an old police report buried in a box of miscellaneous documents. It detailed Catherine's car accident. Driver's side impact at 65 mph. Death instantaneous. What caught my eye was a handwritten note in the margin. Evidence of tampering with brake lines inconclusive. Case closed per directive. My hands shook as I photographed the report. That night, I cried for the first time since Catherine's funeral. Not from sadness, but from vindication. I wasn't crazy. Something had happened to her. But one document wasn't enough. I needed more. In year 4, Malcolm promoted me to executive assistant after I saved an important client relationship. He'd botched a presentation, insulting the client's product vision. After he left, I stayed behind and worked through the night redesigning their proposal. When the client signed a 7-figure contract, Malcolm took all the credit. But he also gave me a key to his office. You've earned this, he said, dropping the key in my palm. I need someone I can trust. I nodded. The weight of the key nothing compared to the weight of my patience. That key opened more than his office. It opened file cabinets, storage rooms, and eventually, a lockbox hidden behind the false bottom of his desk drawer. Inside was a thumb drive labeled CP Final. I waited a week before taking it, creating a perfect replica to leave in its place. When I finally viewed its contents in a coffee shop 3 cities away, I nearly vomited. The drive contained video footage of Malcolm arguing with Catherine in her office. The timestamp showed 11:43 p.m., the night before she died. It's my company too, Malcolm shouted, his face contorted with rage. I deserve those patents. Catherine stood her ground. You didn't design them. You didn't build them. You didn't invest a penny of your own money. The board will never approve. The video cut off as Malcolm lunged toward her. I sat in that coffee shop until closing time, the footage playing on loop in my head. I now had motive, but still not enough proof for legal action. Malcolm was too powerful, too connected with local authorities. If I moved too soon, I'd lose everything. So I waited, and I planned. Year 5 brought an unexpected complication. James Porter, Malcolm's 16-year-old son. Malcolm's ex-wife had reached her breaking point, dumping the troubled teenager on his father's doorstep before moving to Europe with her new husband. I need you to deal with this, Malcolm told me, gesturing toward James, who stood sullenly in the corner of the office. Find him a good school. Keep him out of trouble. Keep him away from me. I expected to hate James on principle. Instead, I found a perceptive, wounded kid struggling under the weight of his father's indifference. He doesn't talk about her, you know. James said one day as I drove him to a therapy appointment. Who? My aunt. Your mom. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Catherine wasn't my mother. She was my aunt. James shrugged. Sorry. Dad never mentions her, so I just assumed. He trailed off, staring out the window. What do you know about her? I asked carefully. Not much, just that she was smart. Really smart. And that she died in an accident. He turned to look at me. Dad got rid of all her pictures after she died. Not all of them, I said before I could stop myself. That night, I showed James the only photograph I had of Catherine, the two of us at my high school graduation. She was beaming, her arm around my shoulders, her entire face lit up with pride. James studied it for a long time. You look like her, he said finally. People used to say that all the time. He handed the photo back carefully. Why do you work for my dad? You don't seem to like him very much. The question caught me off guard. For a split second, I considered telling him everything. Instead, I said, it's complicated. Adult complicated or actually complicated? He asked with a hint of a smile. Actually complicated. James nodded as if this made perfect sense. Most things are, once you look closely enough. By year 7, I had earned Malcolm's complete trust. I managed his schedule, screened his calls, and prepared his presentations. Behind the scenes, I was building my case, documenting financial irregularities, recording conversations, and making connections with key players in the industry. I also became James's de facto guardian. I attended his parent-teacher conferences, helped with college applications, and bailed him out when he experimented with drugs and alcohol. Episodes I carefully kept from Malcolm. Why do you care? James asked me once after I picked him up at 2 a.m. from a party gone wrong. It's not your job to deal with my mess. Maybe I see something in you worth saving, I replied. Or maybe you're just really good at your job, he said, his words slightly slurred, taking care of Porter family problems. I didn't answer, keeping my eyes on the road. The truth was more complicated than either option. In some twisted way, helping James felt like honoring Catherine. She would have wanted me to protect him, regardless of his father's sins. Year 10 brought a critical breakthrough. Malcolm, increasingly reckless with his success, began cutting regulatory corners on a new product line. When safety concerns emerged, he buried the reports and fired the whistleblowers. I documented everything while publicly playing the loyal lieutenant. We need to delay the launch, I told him privately, showing him the test results. These failure rates are dangerous. Malcolm laughed. Since when are you risk-averse? We announce next week. The stock will soar, we'll fix the issues in version 2, and no one gets hurt. People could actually get hurt, I insisted. These devices could catch fire under certain conditions. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. You know what Catherine's problem was? She was too cautious, too ethical. It held her back. He pointed at me. Don't make the same mistake. I nodded, bile rising in my throat. That night, I anonymously sent the safety reports to a trusted journalist. When the story broke, Porter Industries' stock plummeted. Malcolm was furious, ordering an internal investigation to find the leak. I led the investigation myself, methodically eliminating suspects until only one remained, a low-level engineer with a history of complaints about management. Malcolm fired him personally, while I watched from the doorway. Another sin added to my growing ledger. The fired engineer killed himself 2 weeks later. The note he left behind simply read, I didn't do it, but no one will believe me now. I almost gave up then, almost came forward with everything I had. But it wouldn't have been enough to bring Malcolm down completely. He would have recovered, retaliated, and everything Catherine had built would be lost forever. So I compartmentalized my guilt and refocused on the ultimate goal. The engineer became another ghost driving me forward. By year 12, James had graduated from college and returned to work at Porter Industries against my private advice. Malcolm installed him as Director of Innovation, a meaningless title that came with a corner office and no actual responsibilities. Keep an eye on him, Malcolm told me. Make sure he doesn't interfere with anything important. But James wasn't as pliable as his father expected. He started attending meetings, asking questions, reviewing old company Catherine's patents. I watched him with growing unease, uncertain whether he was an ally or a threat to my carefully constructed plans. These patents, James said to me one evening, spreading old documents across his desk. The ones from before my aunt died. The engineering is incredible, way ahead of its time. I kept my face neutral. Catherine was very innovative. But the weird thing is, the design approach totally changes after her death. He showed me comparative diagrams. See? These early ones are elegant, efficient. The later ones are basically brute force solutions. Same person couldn't have designed both. I felt a chill. What are you suggesting? James leaned forward. I think my dad took credit for my aunt's work after she died, and I think you know that. We stared at each other across the desk. The moment stretched, fraught with unspoken accusations and secrets. That's a serious allegation, I said finally. Not an allegation, an observation. James gathered the patents, carefully returning them to their folder. I just haven't figured out why you're still here if you know the truth. I left his office without answering, my carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. James was getting too close, seeing too much. I needed to accelerate my timeline or risk exposure. Year 13 nearly ruined everything. The SEC opened a preliminary inquiry into Porter Industries' accounting practices based on an anonymous tip, not from me for once. Malcolm called an emergency executive meeting. "Someone's trying to take us down," he announced, his face flushed with rage. "I want every department audited, every employee investigated. Nobody keeps secrets from me." His eyes lingered on me for a fraction too long. Had he discovered something? Did he suspect me? I maintained my composure, taking notes as if my heart weren't threatening to pound out of my chest. After the meeting, Malcolm asked me to stay behind. "Diana, how long have you been with me now? 13 years? Almost 14, I corrected automatically. He nodded, pouring himself a whiskey. "You know, loyalty is a rare commodity these days." "I've always been loyal to Porter Industries," I said carefully. "To Porter Industries," he repeated, swirling his drink. "Not to me personally?" I forced a smile. "The company is your legacy, Malcolm. Your vision. They're one and the same." He studied me for a long moment, then suddenly smiled. "Of course they are. That's why I'm promoting you to Chief of Staff. I need someone I can trust implicitly during this unfortunate investigation." The promotion wasn't a reward. It was a test. Malcolm was keeping me closer, watching for any sign of betrayal. I accepted with appropriate gratitude while internally recalibrating my plans. That night, I received a text from James. "Need to talk. Not at the office. Important." We met at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. James looked exhausted, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. "Dad's panicking about this SEC thing," he said without preamble. "I've never seen him like this." "The inquiry will probably amount to nothing," I replied. "The SEC investigates companies all the time." James leaned forward. "He's destroying documents, Diana. I saw him feeding files into a shredder at 3 a.m. My pulse quickened. "What kind of files?" "Old ones. From around the time Aunt Catherine died." James ran a hand through his hair. "I managed to save a few pages. They don't make much sense on their own, but..." He slid a folded paper across the table. It was a partial insurance document. A life policy on Catherine Porter worth $10 million. The beneficiary was Malcolm. "Did you know about this?" James asked. I shook my head, the pieces clicking into place. The company was struggling before Catherine died. The influx of cash from this policy would have saved it. "Along with taking control of her patents," James added. "Pretty convenient timing." "James, this is dangerous territory," I warned. "If your father thinks you're digging into this..." "What? What would he do?" James's eyes locked on mine. "What are you not telling me, Diana?" I hesitated, years of careful planning warring with the urgent need for an ally. "I think your father may have been involved in Catherine's death," I said finally, "and I've been gathering evidence for years to prove it." James didn't look surprised. "I've suspected something like that. The way he never mentions her. The way her entire legacy was erased." "I need more time," I said. "A few more pieces of evidence. If we move too soon, he'll destroy everything." James reached across the table and took my hand. "I want to help. She was my aunt. And He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Your father," I completed for him. "This would destroy him, James. Are you prepared for that?" His expression hardened. If he had anything to do with her death, he destroyed himself a long time ago. I just didn't see it until now. We developed a careful strategy. James would continue as normal, playing the dutiful but somewhat incompetent son. I would accelerate my evidence gathering, using my new position as Chief of Staff to access the final documents I needed. The next 2 years were a delicate dance of deception. While Malcolm focused on fighting the SEC inquiry, I methodically built my case. James provided cover, distracting his father with minor crises and business proposals that went nowhere. I also made contact with Westridge Industries, Porter's chief competitor. Through carefully encrypted communications, I laid the groundwork for my eventual move, providing enough insider information to prove my value without crossing legal lines. Malcolm promoted me to Chief of Staff, but introduced me to important people as practically family. He never noticed how I documented everything, every questionable transaction, every mistress, every drunken confession. "What would I do without you, Diana?" he'd say, patting my shoulder like I was a loyal dog. One night, after a particularly successful board meeting, Malcolm invited me to dinner. He was 3 martinis in when he leaned across the table and said, "You know, Catherine always said you had potential. Guess she was right about something." I kept my expression neutral. "You don't talk about her much?" "Not much to say." He shrugged. "Brilliant, but naive. No killer instinct." "Is that why the company struggled under her leadership?" I asked innocently. Malcolm snorted. "Catherine was an engineer, not a businesswoman. She could design a perfect product but couldn't make the hard decisions." He leaned closer. "Sometimes progress requires sacrifice." I recorded every word. In year 15, all the pieces finally aligned. The SEC investigation had uncovered financial irregularities but nothing catastrophic. Malcolm had weathered the storm, emerging more arrogant and invulnerable than ever. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Malcolm's former driver, now retired and diagnosed with terminal cancer. I'd maintained contact with him over the years, sending holiday cards and occasional gifts. When he called asking to meet, I drove to his hospice facility immediately. "I should have told someone years ago," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "But Mr. Porter paid for my daughter's college, paid for my wife's medical bills. I convinced myself it wasn't my business." "What wasn't your business, Henry?" His eyes filled with tears. "The night Ms. Catherine died, I drove Mr. Malcolm to her house. He was angry, shouting on the phone about patents and board votes. When I dropped him off, he told me to wait 30 minutes, then leave whether he came out or not. Henry gripped my hand. I heard them arguing inside, then a crash. When he came out, his knuckles were bloody. Did you tell the police? Henry shook his head. Mr. Malcolm said it was a family matter. Next morning, we heard about the car accident. He closed his eyes. But I serviced Miss Catherine's vehicles myself. Those brakes were perfect. I recorded his statement, had it notarized, and added it to my evidence file, the final piece. On the 15th anniversary of my joining the company, Malcolm threw a small office party. Cheap champagne and a grocery store cake with my name spelled wrong. To Diana, he toasted, the backbone of this organization. Everyone clapped. I smiled. Actually, I said, my voice steady, I have an announcement too. Malcolm looked surprised. I'd never interrupted him before. I've accepted a position as CEO of Westridge Industries. The room went silent. Westridge was our biggest competitor. Malcolm laughed nervously. You can't be serious. I start Monday, I replied, sliding an envelope across the table. My resignation, effective immediately. His face flushed red. You can't just, I already have. I stood up. And Malcolm, I'm taking the Coleman account with me. The Coleman account was 60% of the company's revenue. Malcolm's face went from red to white. You wouldn't dare. That's corporate espionage. I smiled. No, Malcolm, it's business. As I walked out, I felt 15 years of accumulated rage and humiliation transform into something powerful, something calculated. Malcolm called 17 times that night. I didn't answer. James texted once. It's begun. Be careful. On Monday morning, when I walked into Westridge's gleaming headquarters as their new CEO, Malcolm was waiting in the lobby. His expensive suit couldn't hide how disheveled he looked. 3 days of stubble, bloodshot eyes. Diana, please, he said, stepping toward me. Let's talk about this. 2 security guards moved to intercept him, but I held up my hand. 5 minutes, I said, in my office. We rode the elevator in silence. Malcolm kept opening his mouth, then closing it again. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. When we reached the top floor, his eyes widened at the view from my corner office, twice the size of his. Sit, I said, gesturing to a chair across from my desk. Diana, whatever they're paying you, I'll double it. His voice quivered. Triple it. I laughed. A real laugh. The kind I'd been holding back for 15 years. This isn't about money, Malcolm. Then what? Recognition? I'll make you partner. Co-CEO. Whatever you want. I sat down and opened my laptop. Do you remember Catherine Porter? His brow furrowed. My sister? What does she have to do with... Catherine Porter wasn't just your sister. She was also my mentor. My hero. Malcolm scoffed. Ancient history. What's your point? My point is that I know what happened the night before her accident. I turned my laptop to face him. Your driver was very thorough in his statement. The color drained from Malcolm's face as he saw Henry's notarized testimony. Henry's dying, I continued. He has nothing to lose by telling the truth now. That old fool is confused, Malcolm sputtered. It was years ago. His memory is failing. Perhaps, but the physical evidence isn't. I clicked to the next document, the police report with the note about tampered brake lines. Nor are the financial records showing you were nearly bankrupt before her death. Another click. Or the insurance policy naming you as beneficiary. Another click. Or this. The final image was the thumb drive contents. Malcolm lunging at Catherine, his face contorted with rage. You've been planning this for years. This whole time you've been learning from you, I finished. Watching how you destroy people, how you take what isn't yours, how you erase those who stand in your way. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely audible. Justice. Money then. Name your price. I leaned forward. You still don't understand. This isn't a negotiation. It's a reckoning. I pressed the intercom. Send them in. The door opened, and 3 people entered. An SEC investigator, Porter Industries' largest shareholder, and James. Malcolm's eyes widened at the sight of his son. James, what are you doing here? Choosing a side, James replied quietly. The right side. The next hour was systematic destruction. The SEC investigator detailed the expanded investigation now targeting Malcolm personally. The shareholder explained how the board had voted to suspend him pending criminal charges. And James outlined how he would be assuming temporary leadership of Porter Industries during the transition. This is a coup, Malcolm snarled. A conspiracy. No, I said calmly. This is consequences. When the others left, Malcolm remained seated, staring at me with naked hatred. 15 years, he said. You worked for me for 15 years just for this moment. I worked for Catherine's company, I corrected. You just happened to be sitting in her chair. He lunged suddenly, his hands reaching for my throat. I was prepared, stepping aside as security rushed in, restraining him as he shouted obscenities. You're nothing without me, he screamed as they dragged him out. I made you. No, Malcolm, I said, though he couldn't hear me anymore. Catherine made me. You just gave me a reason. In the following weeks, everything unraveled for Malcolm Porter. The SEC filed formal charges. The board removed him permanently. Old associates disappeared, unwilling to be caught in his downfall. The carefully constructed facade of business genius crumbled, revealing the fraud beneath. I watched from a distance, running Westridge Industries while quietly advising James on Porter's restructuring. We met weekly for strategy sessions that often turned personal. Did you always know? James asked one evening. About my father's involvement in Catherine's death? I suspected, I admitted. But suspicion isn't proof. I needed evidence that would stand up in court, and you spent 15 years getting it. He shook his head. That's dedication. Or obsession, I said with a sad smile. I'm not sure there's much difference. What happens now? He asked. Between our companies, I mean. That depends on you. Competition or collaboration. James considered this. Aunt Catherine believed in collaboration, in building things that matter. Yes, she did. The decision was made during that conversation, though neither of us stated it explicitly. Within 6 months, we announced the merger of Porter and Westridge Industries under a new name, Catherine Porter Technologies. On the day we unveiled the plaque dedicating our new research center to Catherine, I visited Malcolm in prison, where he awaited trial. He'd aged a decade in 6 months. Come to gloat? He asked, his voice hoarse. I placed a file folder on the table between us. I came to give you these. Inside were photos of James at the dedication ceremony, standing tall, smiling, healing. He's doing well, I said, better than anyone expected. Malcolm's hands trembled as he touched the photos. Why are you showing me this? Because revenge wasn't everything I imagined it would be, I admitted. It didn't bring Catherine back. It didn't erase 15 years of working for a man I hated. Then what did you get out of all this? His voice was bitter. Perspective. I stood up. Your son is rebuilding what you destroyed. Not just the company, but the trust of everyone around it. Catherine's legacy lives on through him. Malcolm stared at the photos, something like regret flashing across his face. She would have been proud of him. Yes, she would. Not of me, though. He looked up, his eyes hollow. I was her little brother. She always tried to protect me, even from myself. For a moment, I glimpsed the man he might have been. Vulnerable, human, capable of reflection. Then his expression hardened again. The company would have failed under her leadership. I saved it. By killing her? I asked quietly. Malcolm flinched. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. We argued. She fell, hit her head on the corner of her desk. His voice dropped to a whisper. I panicked. The brakes were insurance. The confession hung in the air between us. After 15 years, the truth, spoken aloud at last. I'll make sure the prosecutor hears this, I said, standing up. Wait. Malcolm's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Off the record, please. For James's sake. I gently removed his hand. James deserves to know the truth. All of it. As I turned to leave, Malcolm called after me. He's not like me, you know. James. He's like her. I paused at the door. I know. That's why there's still hope for Porter Industries. Outside the prison, I sat in my car for a long time, the weight of 15 years suddenly lifting. My phone buzzed with a text from James. How did it go? I started the engine before replying. He confessed. It's over. 3 dots appeared as James typed, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, thank you for seeing this through. For her. For all of us. I drove back to the office, Catherine's office, now mine, and stood before the portrait we'd hung on the wall. Catherine Porter, brilliant engineer, visionary founder, mentor. The plaque beneath it read simply, Integrity is everything. Malcolm was sentenced to 20 years for Catherine's murder. The company thrived under our joint leadership, and slowly I learned to define myself by something other than revenge. On the 5th anniversary of the merger, James and I stood on the balcony of our new headquarters, watching employees stream into the building below. Do you think she would approve? James asked. Of what we've built? I thought about Catherine's brilliance, her integrity, her vision of technology that improved lives. Yes, I said. I think she would. And you? He turned to face me. Now that it's done, was it worth 15 years of your life? I considered the question carefully. Not for the revenge itself. That was hollow, in the end. But for this. I gestured at the building, the people, the future we were creating, for the chance to finish what she started. To make something meaningful from the wreckage. James nodded, understanding. To honor her legacy. And to build our own, I added. When people talk about revenge, they imagine something violent and immediate. They don't tell you about the aftermath, how the satisfaction fades, how the emptiness returns. They don't tell you that true justice isn't about destroying someone else's life, but about reclaiming your own, about transforming pain into purpose, about choosing, finally, to build rather than break. I waited 15 years to get my revenge, and it was everything I imagined it to be. But what came after? The healing, the creating, the living, that was something I never imagined at all. And it was better.